course, invite our guest in. He is Chris Vannini, senior writer for The Athletic, covering college football. Chris, welcome into Sons of UCF Live. If you had a couple of issues with social media today?
I'm having a few. I've been locked out of my Twitter account for no reason whatsoever. It seems this is happening to a lot of people who use TweetDeck. You may have noticed Shams tweeted that during the draft. I'm apparently in that boat. Other people are getting verification emails to log back in. I have not gotten one. My DMs is where I had the link to join the show. So my apologies for being on late.
We knew something was up. You're steady Eddie. You're very reliable. Let me start. We're glad you're here. Let me ask you this. For someone who covers college football, do you like a summer that includes naming rights for conferences and private equity? Does it help you generate some content, or are you tired of those stories and can't wait to get ready to talk football?
I mean, I like it more than the last several summers of conference realignment, and unfortunately, I'm concerned there may be more of that before the off season is out. The video game has been fun. That's been a fun thing to talk about instead of all of this other stuff. But college football is year-round sport now. It never stops. There is always something.
That is true. What's your read on Brett Ymark? I mean, he's a disruptor, isn't he? I mean, that's what the Big 12 wanted, and he's certainly doing that and keeps himself in the headlines.
Yeah, look, he knows the position that he's in, that the Big 12 is in, that they're not the Big 10 and the SEC. So you got to do things differently. You got to draw attention. You got to find the right people to have. You got to just do some things that are a little bit different. And for the most part, I think it's been good. I think like the WWE belts was a fun thing. I think some people weirdly looked down on that, but I thought that was fun. I'm not very familiar with Bathing Ape, but other people are. And so like most of these things are like little things. Changing the name of the conference and selling the naming rights, that's a big step, but he's not the only one to be thinking about that. A lot of Group of Five conferences have been thinking about it as well, because again, you got to make up that revenue somehow. And the Big 12 name is like not that historic. It doesn't have 12 teams anyway. So like, I get it. I think that makes a lot more sense than private equity. That I'm not a fan of. But call it the All-State 12. I don't care. I'm still going to call it the Big 12.
They're getting a lot of good branding dollars for something they haven't officially sponsored yet.
Yeah, they really are.
That's a good point.
Chris, there's been a ton going on this offseason, a lot of courtroom battles, a lot of stuff about salary caps, paying players. For the person who just woke up out of a coma and hasn't been following this stuff, can you give us a quick 2-minute digest of what's been going on on the legal front and what this means in terms of compensation, NIL, and sort of where we are right now?
So there were several. So when NIL happens, there was several lawsuits filed, essentially asking for NIL back pay. Athletes who were around pre-NIL and saying, "Hey, the NCAA wouldn't let me make money, and now they're letting players money. I'm owed this amount of money." And there's a statute of limitation of I think 4 years before it was filed, which was 2020. So that's why it goes back that far. But this is the cost of losing that lawsuit would have been several $billion, like would have bankrupted college sports. They can't afford to go to trial and lose. They've been losing every trial in the court case so far. So they decided to settle. And as part of the settlement that has been agreed to, but not approved yet, there'll be the back pay of something like $3 or $4 billion in back pay coming from the NCAA and the various conferences and all that stuff. And then there's also, going forward, a 22% cap on what you can pay, what schools can pay players moving forward. 22% of the average Power 5 athletic budget, which is about $20 million right now. That number is going to go up. So we're about, if this gets approved, and it may not, but if it gets approved, we're heading into a future where schools can spend up to about $20 million on players. How they spend that, we don't know. We don't know if Title IX is involved. It's got to be equal between men and women. We don't know a lot of that still, but this settlement had to happen or else college sports was going to be bankrupted. And so it's a two-pronged approach to try to keep things going.
Now, with that settlement, would that be the end of NILs and collectives, or would there still be a separate NIL revenue stream for players?
NIL is still around. It's separate from what the schools are paying, essentially. Now, could collectives come in-house? That's possible. Could they shift to be marketing agencies? That's possible. A lot of this is, remember, a lot of fans are kind of getting sick of donating to NIL, especially if you're not getting the return on your investment. So now, do you donate that money to the school again? Maybe you used to donate to the school, then you switch to the collective. Now you go back to the school, and that money is going to go directly to the player. So collectives and where they fit still very TBD. I don't think they'll go away, especially the ones that are really good. But it is going to be a different environment, and I think everybody's still trying to figure out what that looks like.
Speaking of trying to figure things out, where do you think it goes with considering these college athletes employees?
That will be determined by the National Labor Relations Board, potentially in a few months here. They will rule on a case that involves players, men's basketball players and football players against the NCAA and the Pac-12 and USC, similar to the Dartmouth basketball case. Now, whatever that ruling is, will be appealed. There will be a very long process. It may be a couple of years before they officially become employees. But that's where that is trending. The NCAA and schools are lobbying Congress for some sort of essentially an antitrust type exemption that would rule that they are not employees, and that would override whatever the LRB says. So college sports are trying to make sure they're not employees. Labor activists are trying to make sure they are. It's going to take a few years before anything is really finalized.
Let's talk a little football. Are you in the camp that Utah deserves to be the favorite in the Big 12?
I guess, but it's got to be somebody, and you could pick 5 or 6 different teams to be the favorite. I understand Utah because of what they've historically done the last couple of years, going to 2 straight Rose Bowls and all that. Cam Rising is back. If I had to pick someone, yeah, I'd pick Utah. Do I feel very confident in that pick? I do not.
How much do you think this league misses Texas and Oklahoma, or do you think they've backfilled pretty adequately going into this next season?
Well, it depends. There's multiple ways to look at it. I think the conference is going to be very competitive, very fun, very exciting. There's no bad teams. Everybody can beat anybody. That makes for good football week to week. But the chances of getting multiple teams in the playoff will be diminished. There'll be likely at least one spot guaranteed for the conference champion. But what happens if everybody's 9-3 and 8-4 and 7-5? Then you're probably only getting one team in. And I think it's going to be tougher because of that depth, because of that lack of top level, that it may be more difficult now for the league to get multiple playoff teams as opposed to when Texas and Oklahoma were around. So it just kind of depends how you look at it. As a fan from the outside, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to watching the conference every week. If you're the conference itself, you're hoping a couple teams can jump away from the rest of the pack so you can get some more playoff teams.
Chris, I'm sorry, I got to circle back real quick. When you started, you said that maybe realignment isn't fully done. I know there's a bunch of stuff going on in the ACC. What are you hearing, or what do you think may be on the horizon from a realignment standpoint?
It's those two. It's Florida State and Clemson. They're very public about it. They're suing to try to get out of the grant of rights, which would allow them to leave the ACC for a much, much lower fee than $500 million or more, which is what it would currently stand at. If they would have to negotiate a price. The belief is it might be somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion. If they can't get out. If they can, then it's like $100 million or something like that, just the ACC exit fee. We also don't know for sure if the Big Ten and the SEC would take them, because they can't say that yet, because that would be tampering. So that's kind of what we got to wait for. Do we get, I think August 15th was a deadline. Someone at Florida State had said hey, we need to make a decision by then if it's going to be leaving for the following year. The lawsuits don't appear to be getting settled in court anytime soon. They're all being appealed. There's multiple things going on all at once. So the question now is, do we get to July or August, and do we see Florida State and or Clemson say, we're leaving the ACC? And that's all they can say at that point. They can't say, we're going to the Big Ten, we're going to the SEC, because they haven't gotten out of the conference yet. And until they get out of the conference, none of the other conferences are going to invite them. So it may be Florida State says we're leaving, but it takes a while to get figured out, and the lawsuits continue and the legal fights continue, or they negotiate some sort of buyout. I don't think it's going to be resolved quickly. I don't think it's not going to be Oklahoma and Texas just announcing, hey, we're going to the SEC. It's not going to be like that. But could Florida State and or Clemson just say we're leaving and the rest TBD? It's possible.
Chris, let's talk a bit about UCF. Obviously, Trace asked you about sort of the Big 12. UCF kind of in that middle of the pack in the Big 12. I think some people are like the moves that have taken place, like what Gus has done. But obviously, last year wasn't a stellar season for the Knights in the Big 12. What do you make of this UCF team now? What do you make of the changes that Gus made? KJ Jefferson, Ted Roof, Penny Boone. I mean, they've certainly done some stuff in the portal and the coaching ranks. What do you make of where UCF is right now?
Yeah, I mean, it was going to take time to adjust to the Big 12. Every single team that made the transition struggled. It takes time to get the depth, to get the top end talent, and to get KJ Jefferson and Penny Boone. Like, it's a really good quarterback and a really good running back. Like, those are the moves you got to make. So should be better, should be improved. But again, the conference is so deep, like every game on that schedule could be a toss up, and it makes it impossible to predict how the season's going to go. But do I think UCF is better than they were a year ago at this time? Yeah, I do. I think I would.
Chris, I saw you did a podcast with Jessica Spatana where you talked about the UCF Florida game being potentially a trap game for UF. What do you make of that matchup, and why do you think it may be a trap game for the Gators?
Well, it's partly because of where it is on the schedule, and if I have this right in my head, I think that game for Florida comes after Mississippi State and before Tennessee. So it's if you're Florida and you look ahead toward Tennessee in your big rivalry game, that's where the game kind of fits in a trap situation. And I know UCF's not a G5 team anymore, but I think every UCF fan knows how Florida fans feel about them and feel about UCF. So could there be some overlooking of it? Potentially. That's why I put it really high. I think I put that really high on my trap game scale, even if the teams have similar records and whatnot. It's kind of, is that a situation where Florida might overlook that game? And I look at the schedule. I look at the way those two schools fit within the state. It felt like to me it'd be a pretty big trap game, not meant as any disrespect toward UCF or anything.
Couple of weeks away from Big 12 Media Days. How much of a circus do you expect around Deion Sanders?
Good question. I'm going to be there. I have no idea what to expect. I was not at Pac-12 Media Days last year. I didn't see any videos, so I don't know. It's one of the things I'm most interested in figuring
Chris,
out.
I don't think he was there last year. I think he had surgery on his toe or something.
You might be right.
I don't think he was actually at that media day last year.
That's a good point. Yeah, it was like last minute. I think he pulled out. So
yeah,
even more so. No idea.
What do you expect from Colorado? Does anybody really know with as much flux as they've had in the transfer portal?
Well, I don't think they'll be the number 8 offense and the number 20 defense in the country based on the EA Sports rankings for them. I think they'll be better than last year. Last year played out the way we expected. It just happened in an unusual order. 4-8. Yeah, that's about what I would have picked before the season. Lose a bunch of Pac-12 games? Yeah. But because they beat TCU, because they had an exciting game against Colorado State, the way they beat Nebraska, you just like, hey, maybe this is working more than we expected. And then Oregon happened, and then USC happened, and you realize, no, it's not. So Shador's back, Travis Hunter's back. They've added a lot of transfers. They've lost a lot of transfers. I do think on the whole they're better. I do think in year 2, you're not going to fire the offense coordinator halfway through the season. They should be much better. But that week 1 Thursday game against North Dakota State is going to be fascinating. Colorado's favored by I want to say like a touchdown. That might be right. If they lose that game, then everything's going to be blowing up. But if they win that game, I think they'll kind of silence those doubters and be like, all right, like let's see how this goes. And again, they're not going to have to play an Oregon, a top 5 Oregon, a top 5 Washington, or teams like that. It's going to be a lot of teams that are kind of on their level or close to their level in the Big 12. So it's a lot of, again, 50-50 games. If you're Colorado, I think you're thinking 6-6 is a real solid improvement. Get to a bowl game and go from there.
Chris, we saw UCF left off the top 25 toughest places to play on the EA Sports list. Somehow Kyle Field #1, whereas Texas A&M loses all the time at home. What did you make of some of these lists that EA Sports is putting out and sort of the buzz that's leading into the release of this new college football game?
I think for the most part, the lists have been fine. There's just like a couple of things on every one that make no sense. One of those was Colorado's offense and Colorado's defense. One of those was USC's defense being, I think, 16th in the country. One of those was Alabama's stadium being the number 2 toughest place to play. Notre Dame being down at 21. Texas A&M at #1. Like, I get it. I would have put LSU #1 easily, but like Texas A&M, when they're good, it gets loud. I get it. It's 110,000 people. Like, that one I didn't mind so much. I moved them down a couple of spots, but that I'm not losing sleep over a couple of spots, but look, it's giving us something to talk about in June. That's not realignment. That's not about lawsuits. And so I'm really enjoying this. It's basically talking about football just in a video game form. You know, it's like we're going to use the video game to research and preview the season. Like, you're going to go, hey, who's on this team we're playing? We're playing Temple. I don't know who's good on Temple. Let me pull up the game. Oh, they got a good running back or something like that. Like, the game being back is now just kind of a part of the way we will look at the sport. And I think these rankings coming out are an example of how that works.
We've talked a lot about off the field stories, Chris, and everything going off, on courtrooms and whatnot. What's an on the field story that maybe you're looking at closely this upcoming season? Something on the field or team related? What's one story maybe people aren't thinking about or following that you're interested to see how it plays out?
I mean, it's not something that no one's talking about, but I think I'm just fascinated by Alabama. Nick Saban has been there for 16, 17 years. He's the greatest coach of all time. Kalen DeBoer has to follow that. Going 10-2 is not good enough. How are they going to handle that? They lost some guys in the portal. They lost Caleb Downs to Ohio State. How does Alabama look when it's not Nick Saban's Alabama? I remember Mike Shula's Alabama and previous Alabamas that weren't very good. A lot of people grew up only knowing Alabama as that. So I'm interested in that. And then the other one is Ohio State as dominant as we think? This should be the best team in the country. It should be the most talented team in the country, one of the most experienced teams in the country. This is a team that if it doesn't win the national championship, people are going to have questions. And can they get past Michigan? It's wild. They have not beaten Michigan since 2019 now because they didn't play in 2020. 3 straight losses to Michigan. Michigan wins the national championship. Ohio State was dominating that rivalry forever. And then Michigan flips it and wins a national championship just like that. And so, like, he's going to be on Ryan Day. Like, he has to beat Michigan this year. If you don't do it, like, you might get fired despite having a ridiculously good record, despite being a missed field goal against Georgia away from probably winning the national championship 2 years ago. But that's the margin of error you have at Ohio State. And if they lose to Michigan again, they're probably going to make the playoff because it's a 12-team playoff, but it's not going to be fun.
Earlier, you talked about the Big 12 being wide open. What's a team that may surprise that we're not really thinking a whole lot about?
I'm interested in Iowa State. They had a really good run there for a couple of years, dipped, but they've kind of gotten back now. Solid last year, despite having that whole sports gambling scandal over everything. They're really good on defense. That's a defense that should be top 25 in the video game. And that's always such a difficult place to play. Iowa State's got a lot of support. They've got a lot in there now that they don't have to compete with Texas and Oklahoma. They're one of those schools that, like, they could be right there with Oklahoma State, with Kansas State, like on an annual basis now. and I'm really interested to see if they can do that.
Well, let's wrap up with a video game. As the story goes, how much fun was it to cover and report on that one?
Believe it or not, it was a lot of fun. I was down there in Orlando, obviously, with a handful of folks playing the game, and it's kind of a blur because we only had about 3 hours to play with it. But I was just flipping through every team I could to see what it's like. Because, like, we got to play Madden and then NCAA or college football. But, like, Madden, like, every team's the same. Like, every stadium's the same. It's pretty much college football. Every team in this game is a different experience. And so, like, even though I got to play it, there's still so many questions I have, so many things I still want to do and need to get to. And so I know everybody's excited about it. I'm excited about it. I've tried to answer as many questions as I possibly can about it, but there's still a lot we don't know. We didn't get to test out Dynasty mode and do these other things. So when that game finally comes, there's a lot I'm going to have to dig into still.
Did you have to pause between being a reporter and thinking about your story and what you wanted to ask and just having fun with it?
No, I mean, I was constantly writing stuff down on my notes app. All right, this is what this is like. This is what this is like. I also had to jump off, do some interviews with some of the people who were working there because we just had this tight window for whatever reason. And so it was just like, but it was like cool to see the game again. It's been 11 years. I still have NCAA 13 in my Xbox 360 that I play. And it just felt like a totally different game. It's a totally new experience. It's a lot of fun running the ball. It's a bit harder to throw the ball than it used to be. And it was just kind of surreal to be like, this is it. This is the thing I'd been waiting a decade to play, and I'm here and I'm doing it. And it was a fun little piece that I got.
Well, it was worth the wait to have you join us on Sons of UCF Live. Chris Vannini, senior writer at The Athletic, covering college football. Thanks for being with us on Sons Live, and safe travels to Big 12 Media Days in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for having me.